Please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The flag's behind me.
Thank you, and welcome to this joint meeting of the Attleboro School Committee and the Municipal Council. This is your notice that this meeting is being electronically recorded. At this time, I'll turn it over to Municipal Council President Jay DeLisio for the Council's call to order.
Thank you, Chair. Geddes, I'd like to call this meeting of the Municipal Council to order at 6:31? 6:30, still 6:30. Kick it back to you.
Thank you, sir. So the primary objective of this meeting tonight is a presentation from the school district about our budget planning and projections for next year. So I'll invite Superintendent Sawyer to the podium. And as he approaches, I'll just say, we know that city funding is a community-wide concern. And so as the largest department that takes up more than half of the city's operating budget, we do think that it warrants some additional attention, and so we appreciate the council joining us tonight to hear some of that information. So, Superintendent Sawyer.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening and welcome to the Municipal Council. It's a pleasure to have you here this evening. I think it was a great event last year that you joined us, and I think it's very helpful for all parties that we're all hearing the same message and are working together to address the needs of the city. So with that, I'm going to get right into our presentation. Our goals for this evening, one, we want to go over why it is that we have this meeting at this time. We want to talk a little bit about FY25 that we're finishing up. We want to estimate what FY26 looks like at level service. We want to set our educational priorities for the budgeting process that is before us, and then preview some of our remaining steps. So, why are we here now in this moment? We used to not start the public part of the budget process until March. And then some time ago, we started having this meeting, and I think it's important that we really separate out why it is that we're here this evening. Of course, budgets are a reflection of values, right? It's very easy to talk a good game about anything, but in the end, where we spend our money and how we spend our money really indicates what it is that we care about and says the most about what it is that we're really doing. And so how we spend the very valuable resources that this community provides to us is one of the most important functions that the administration serves. And we do our best to do that in line with how the community wants us to do it as dictated by the school committee. So it's really, really important that we do this in a transparent fashion and in a way that our talk and our actions are well aligned. Now, fast approaching us is what we refer to as the cherry sheet moment, right? Later this month, we anticipate that the governor will release her budget, as is the start of the state budgeting process. And in that moment, when those numbers become clear, both the school and the city will basically have a pretty decent understanding of what is going to follow. And while the final number that we land on will, slightly change over the course of the process as the state goes through its process and the city goes through its process, we, in that moment, will pretty much know where we are and what kind of funds will be available to us. And so at that point, it's really just a matter of how do we make work the number that we're dealing with. Because in that moment, the number is basically set and there's nothing the city or the school can do to adjust it, because the factors that control that number are basically in place. And so we have found that trying to talk about issues other than how to make that number work become ineffective, because at that point, ideas about how things should be or concerns about a different set of conditions don't make any sense when We know what the budget's going to be, and we have to make it work on that. In that moment, the real emphasis needs to be on the reality of what does that number mean and how do we make it work. And that ultimately, I think, is one of the chief jobs that I have as your superintendent, right? The community has limited resources. It provides those resources to the school department, and then we have to make our best decisions about how to employ those resources to deliver the best possible educational experience for the 6,000 or so students that we're entrusted with, right? And the number is the number, and all of us took our jobs to come and serve this community with a full understanding of what that looked like, right? This, as I've said on many, many times before, we are an underfunded school district, right? We do not have, when you compare funding in Attleboro to other communities, we do not have the same kind of resources that other communities have. That has been the case my entire career, and that is not likely to change while I'm still employed here. And so ultimately, my job is to make work what is available to the best of my ability. And I'm here to tell you that we try our best to do that. That said, I do think there needs to be a conversation in this community that I often see lacking about what the ramifications of our funding really looks like for the schools. And so this is where we talk about the difference between budgeting and funding. For a good chunk of my career, there was an annual drama over the school budget, and it was divisive, and it was, I would say, bad for the city as a whole. And we have worked very, very hard. I've worked with the current mayor and the previous mayors to get us out of that cycle, right? Because one, I recognize fully that the community has limited resources, and that the reason why the schools are underfunded is not because the community doesn't support our schools. This beautiful building that we're in here this evening for this meeting is proof that the residents of this community do value education, care about education, and are willing to support education. But we have limited resources as a community, and our funding position is really a matter of the realities of the economics within the community. And so we need to separate out a budgeting concern from a funding concern. We have worked hard as an administration to resolve our budget position so that we can operate the schools with the resources that are available to us. And for the last decade, I think we've demonstrated our ability to do that. But that does not change the reality, which is that we are running this school district at a significant discount from what funding looks like across the state. In most communities, there is significant expenditure over what the state sets as our limits. In fact, the most recent number I looked at said that the average community in Massachusetts is spending 132% of the minimum. Now, we can talk about, well, what's the point of a minimum if everyone's spending way, way above it? I think that suggests that perhaps that formula is problematic. But the bottom line here is that most communities recognize that to do what we're being asked to do as school districts in Massachusetts requires more than that minimum. And again, the average is 132%. Here in Attleboro, I think the most recent number was 102%. We've been fluctuating between 102 and 104% the last 5 or so years, right? That is a significant difference and reflects real resources that are not available to our students and to our teachers who have to serve those students, right? There are literally hundreds of people who do not work in the Attleboro Public Schools that would if we were funded at a similar level that other communities are funded at. And so the last thing I'm going to say is in the graph that we update each year, right, the blue line is Attleboro's per pupil expenditures. The orange line is the state average, and you'll see that there's a gap, and they roughly track. And then the blue bars are if you take the difference between Attleboro's funding and the state funding, average state funding, and then you multiply that difference by the number of kids we have, that shows you how many millions of dollars, we don't have that, again, average communities do. And the bottom line here in the picture that we're trying to portray here is that that number gets a little bit larger every year. And so we fall further and further behind other communities in our ability to do the job that we need to do. So it's why this is the moment that I think it's appropriate to inform the community that funding is a problem. But I want to say, as the superintendent, and as a resident, I fully recognize that that reflects Attleboro's modest means. It's not a reflection of a commitment or our values or how much support we have in the community. So my job is to make it work, and I'm gonna, for the last time this year until next year, go back to trying to make it work and not make this point. But once a year, I do think I need to make the point to the community that I don't know how sustainable it is that we maintain this place at such a significant deficit from what normal is across the Commonwealth, right? And I want to give credit to our educators because they're the ones who make up the difference, right? The teachers in this district go above and beyond every day for our children, and they have to because we don't have the same resources that other communities do. So we owe them a debt of gratitude. I make sure to try to give them that credit. I know the school committee feels that way, and I'm sure the council does as well. So they deserve our credit, and I worry about our collective ability to maintain this indefinitely. But there is no cause for panic. There's no reason to ring an alarm bell. This is the reality that we're operating in. We will continue to make it work this year, next year, and for the foreseeable future. But I do think there is, from my perspective, I'm concerned that there isn't enough awareness of how much that gap really is between what other communities are able to provide and what we are. So that's my point in this moment. But as I say, it's back to finding a way to make it work. And so I'll move off of funding and into budgeting. And to talk a little bit about this year and beyond, I will call up Ms. Perrella.
So for those of you that I haven't met yet, my name is Brittany Perrella. I'm the Assistant Director of Finance and Operations here at the schools. To get started, so our current FY25 budget is $98,346,114, which excludes our transportation costs, as that's not a net school spending expense. So the net school spending dollars go to things like curriculum, textbooks, staffing, and other expenses that contribute to student learning. So ESSER, if you're not aware, ESSER is kind of like the ARPA of schools. So we were awarded $6.2 million in ESSER funds. These funds were fully utilized and expended in a few different ways. We used $3.6 million for air quality upgrades, allowing our buildings to run more efficiently. Because of the air quality work that took place at Willett, Thatcher, and Studley, we can now report that all of our schools have AC, which is a big improvement for us. We've successfully transitioned the following additional supports and services over to our operating budget in FY25 that were previously paid for out of ESSER. Things such as the Attleboro Virtual Academy, which is our online high school option, services and supports provided by Ms. DePalma and her team in the Welcome Center, and paraprofessional support for K-2, which is about four teachers at each elementary school. By maximizing the grant.
Brittany, I'm sorry,
Oh,
you
sure.
got a question?
Excuse me, could you please move the microphone? I'm having a hard time hearing
Sorry.
you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Better. So maximizing the grant to $0 balance, we ensured that every dollar was used to benefit our schools. So what does next year look like? While progress has been made, we're facing several challenges for FY26. As you're probably already aware, the city's health insurance and retirement insurance expenses have risen substantially by 10 and 18% respectively. For context, it's about 1% adjustment in health insurance equates to about $140,000, so it's a significant portion of our budget. Another challenge we're seeing is the ACA evening program continues to grow, driving greater transportation needs for participating students. The ACA is Attleboro Community Academy. It's our alternative high school option for our students that struggle in traditional classroom settings. And tuition for our special education programs remains a challenge. It's growing at a rate outpacing cost of living adjustments, so it's currently projected to as a 6% rise for tuition costs in FY26. So addressing student learning gaps remains a significant concern. Many of these gaps require additional supports for behavior, emotional, and academic needs to help our students to continue to thrive. Another challenge we are facing is surrounding the increased transportation volumes for McKinney-Vento, which is homeless population, foster, and special education students. These students require contracted vendors to transport. Many of the McKinney-Vento or foster are outside of the district, so sometimes a little bit longer for transportation. We can't throw them on a regular school bus on one of those routes, so we'd have to get a specialized van to go pick them up. Or other special education students that require specialized vehicles for like wheelchair accessibility, bus monitor, or other specialized requests that our regular or minibuses aren't equipped with. So the contracts and proposals that are offered for the specialized transportation are increasing their rates, which is, we've seen double the cost of living increases. One of them was about 8% increase for their rates for the year, so we're seeing those struggles as well. The good news. So with the ESSER funds, we were able to partner with Train to make some operational upgrades to our HVAC systems. All the buildings are now operating with HE heating systems for some of our, after some of our extensive phase 1 boiler work. Also, as I mentioned before, all of our buildings are now equipped with AC, which is really exciting. The work that has been brought, excuse me, this work has brought a district HVAC's infrastructure current, which has enabled the district to be more energy efficient. Train had guaranteed the systems would be more efficient, but what we're seeing is surpassing those expectations, and we're going to continue to see it for this. We saw it in FY24, we're going to continue to see it this year, and we're budgeting for that for next year as well. Other IT updates that are going to be taking place over the next few months, we are going to update our Wi-Fi switches in all of the buildings to ensure that our district continues to be able to communicate and operate in our classrooms. This upgrade will be fully funded by a program called E-Rate, which is a federally funded program. The second big update will be our phone systems. Currently in the high school, we have a voice over IP phone system, and our other elementary school and middle schools haven't received that upgrade yet, so we're looking to do that as well. That upgrade for the equipment, there's no cost for that. It's just for the service that they provide. So that'll be coming in the next few months. Enrollment. For FY26 budget was developed using the FY24 enrollment data number as a baseline. The state utilizes October enrollment data to estimate student count and calculate funding allocations for the districts. Based on this data, we are projecting an increase of about 187 students for FY26 for the budgeting numbers. The high school's enrollment, we're looking at approximately 85% of our high school students enrolled in the CTE program. This is beneficial from a funding perspective because we receive additional funding for those vocational students. Unfortunately, we're not likely to see these increases in FY25 just based on our capacity and other trends, but we'll see how that takes. So our level service budget for 26, to maintain the current level of services for the district, our preliminary budget for FY26 is $109,117,356.76. which is reflecting a 4.9 increase over this fiscal year. It's about $5 million. The budget accounts for necessary adjustments to meet the growing demands of rising student population, anticipated inflationary pressures, and the continuation of essential programs and services. It is designed to ensure that we sustain the high-quality education that our students and staff rely on each day. And then I'll turn it over to Assistant Superintendent Regan to discuss our budget goals.
Thank you, Ms. Perella. Good evening, everyone. So given the information that Mr. Superintendent Sawyer and Ms. Perella presented this evening, what are our priorities that guide this decision? First and foremost, I think everyone knows we are a teaching and learning organization, and our focus is to instruct our students. But we would be missing the mark if we didn't acknowledge that we are working with students, we're working with children. And they have emotional needs, they have a behavioral need, they have language needs, and we need to ensure that we provide those supports to them as well so that we can actually address their learning needs. And by doing this, we're able to personalize learning that every single one of them needs on a daily basis. And given that information, we also recognize that we need to monitor our progress in enrollment numbers. We need to maintain appropriate staffing for class sizes as well as building personnel. We also need to make sure that we're maintaining the services that we provide every day for inclusive practices, including our students with disabilities, our English learners, and our students that require significant behavioral and emotional support on a daily basis. And so, given this information, as you also heard this evening, our teachers, we need to make sure that we provide them the appreciation for this, because every single day they are providing high quality experiences with average resources that are available to them. And so we appreciate all that they do and want to make sure that we are able to continue to hold on to the services that we provide to them every single day and maintain that. So, does anyone have any questions either for myself, Superintendent Sawyer, Ms. Perella, or Ms. Furtado?
Mr. Domenici?
Thank you. I just had one, because we're saying we had like a 187 student increase for fiscal year '24. Are we saying that for this year, we're relatively flat to that number? Because I thought we also had an increase this year.
The increase that is in there is from 25 to 26. So or 24 to 25. So it's judging based on the upcoming numbers from this year is what we're going to base on for 26. Does that make sense?
Okay, so that is accounting for this?
Yeah.
Okay. I thought we were a year behind for some reason with the way that I was reading that fiscal year '24 versus fiscal year, for fiscal year '26.
Because we don't have fiscal year 25's numbers out yet. So we're basing it off of the 24s to budget for 26.
The
We're in
enrollment is
fiscal
based,
25 right now.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it just seemed to me, because I remember asking, because I thought by October 1st, we would kind of know, what our number is.
Yeah, so that's what the 187 is the
Okay, so that's for
October
this
number.
current enrollment year.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
a couple of other notes that I think are worth mentioning. The superintendent spoke a lot about the city's commitment and the limited opportunities for the city to increase funding. I think there's also a recognition that the Chapter 70 funding formula at the state level contributes to our underfunding issue, and we're not the only district that suffers from those formulas. Last January or February, Senator Feeney hosted a number of school district and community leaders for a session to discuss Chapter 70 funding with Senate Ways and Means Chair Mike Rodericks. My interpretation of that discussion was that Chapter 70 funding is a known issue across the state, but we are still in the middle of getting through the Student Opportunity Act funding that is supplementing Chapter 70, and there's no intention to address that until at least after Student Opportunity Act has completed. So we're still a couple of years away from that. I did reach out to Senator Feeney today and his staff to ask that if there is any opportunity for us to provide input in those discussions about changing those formulas, we'd love to take that opportunity. I apologize, Superintendent Sawyer, for volunteering you for that. I wouldn't have done it without permission. One of the other initiatives that the administration and the committee took this year is to have a third-party assessment about districting and operations within the schools. We're hoping that that will yield some good information on how we can be operating even more efficiently to try to create some more funding flexibility with what we are given. We also are working with former school committee chair Steve Withers to expand the Attleboro Public Schools Foundation. We're a long way away from our goal of getting that to a funding level where we can use that to help offset costs related to some capital improvement projects, similar to the implementation of district-wide Wi-Fi networks close to 10 years ago now. And again, we know that we're just one city department, and historically our approach to budgeting has been identifying what we have versus what we need and sharing that gap. I know that's not a common practice among the city departments, but to Superintendent Sawyer's point about sustainability, as costs outside of the districts and the city's controls continue to increase, I think identifying those gaps across the city can start to identify where things are more or less sustainable for all the departments. So those are my quick additions before questions. Councilor Kobus?
Thank you. I was wondering if you could talk about the impact briefly of this funding gap and sort of cover it on sort of three different topics. Sort of one, the impact to the students, two, the impact to the teachers, and then three, maybe like the financial impact. And sort of, maybe it's obvious to everybody, but I'd love to understand, you know, this long-term funding gap, like sort of, if you could run through just some of the impacts, whether it's like to the students, the larger class sizes, what are some of the things that our students here in Attleboro are missing that other students have? For the teachers, are we having trouble keeping teachers, hiring teachers? Are teachers leaving? Like, are teachers buying art supplies on their own? Like what are some of those things that our teachers here in Attleboro are doing that other teachers in other communities aren't doing? And then on the financial side, if we all of a sudden reduce the gap, my belief is we wouldn't see much of a change because we're just catching up. But are we, by having this deficit or the gap, are we not maintaining things? Is this financially bad for the city that we're losing out and it's going to cost us in the long run? And so are there financial concerns that we should be aware of? So if we could kind of cover the impact across those three topics, I think that would be useful.
Okay.
Assistant Superintendent Regan, before you respond, Mr. Larson?
Just to Councilor Kobus's part, and I mean, we on the school committee get a report on this every year, and I'm not sure you folks see or hear it. But I think to put some of your questions in perspective, historically, I'll say for the last 3 or 4 years, out of the 351 cities and towns in Massachusetts, Attleboro has funded schools in the bottom 10. Mm-hmm. Not 10%, the bottom 10.
Bottom 10% across two categories.
Not
No,
10%.
the bottom
10.
Number.
out of 351 cities and towns.
And that's above, percent above net school spending and average per student expenditure.
So I think
Those are the
just-
two categories.
I think you need to know that, those numbers as a backdrop to the responses from the assistant superintendent.
Perfect.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. So I think to start, we've been sharing this for a few years now, since we've been doing this presentation, that we are missing about 200 personnel. We are missing about 200 staff members that if we were able to close that gap, we would be able to employ every single day, that we could provide smaller class sizes, we could provide additional support personnel for our students based upon the needs that they have. And so, I think really acknowledging the impact on teachers, really having a smaller class size so they can personalize what's going on in the classroom on a day-to-day basis, and then really thinking about what our students' needs are and providing for them, and really maintaining our students here in district, so that there may be a need that we need to provide our students outside of the district, but this could be something that we could provide services for in the district. And so it's really just thinking about who our students are and what their needs are, and then providing support for them on a daily basis. So I think it's twofold. If we were able to add those additional staff members, we'd be able to impact on a teacher level, but more importantly, on a student level.
For instance, so some of the complaints I hear is people try to get into certain CTEs and there aren't enough CTEs, so that we would be able to expand that. And is there a rough class size? Is there a average class size number for Attleboro, and do we know what the difference is for
There's
the
a
average of
range
Massachusetts?
in our current class sizes. I would say it ranges anywhere from about 23 to 26 based upon the level of students. We try really hard to keep that class size small, particularly at the lower levels, because we know that smaller class sizes really do impact the learning at the lower levels.
I think as a supplement to that answer, DESE tracks, among other metrics, they track a student to staff ratio to take into account not just classroom educators, but paraprofessionals, building administrators, et cetera. Historically, Attleboro has been, I would say, between 15 and 17 students per staff member, whereas districts immediately surrounding us or that are comparable in terms of size and socioeconomics typically are down between 12 to 13, 14 per student, per staff member.
Okay, thank you. And then what about for teachers? The impact?
The impact of the gap on teachers.
Are we having trouble retaining teachers? Are we having trouble hiring teachers in the Attleboro area?
Yeah, so, I think Ms. Singer might be able to provide more detail on that, but I would say that we are able to retain teachers. Mostly, teachers want to be part of the Attleboro community. I feel like the culture that we've built here has really created a sense of belonging, and teachers really want to be a part of what we've built here. So I think once they come, they're able to stay, but we need to be able to remain competitive, because I know that there are districts, if you go further north to Boston, that do pay significantly more.
Okay, but are teachers also going out and buying art supplies on their own? Like, what is the impact by?
In terms of resources.
Yeah, the gap.
We do provide them the resources that they need, but as always, there are some teachers that, want something special or something particular for their classrooms that we just aren't able to provide, and so they'll go out and purchase that themselves. But we try really hard to provide them with the materials that they need. I don't know, Mr. Furtado, if you wanted to expound on that.
And as Mr. Furtado is coming up, I know last year for this meeting, the administration had provided a breakdown of staff and other resources that are missing in that gap. I don't know if there's been too much change to those numbers.
I don't think at the scale that we're talking about that those are what reflect the problem. I think that as you heard, we've tried to augment support at the kindergarten level, and that was to prevent some of the both social and emotional development and the learning gaps from starting there and becoming a bigger problem every year. So, you know, our infrastructure, our wage scales, our professional development are pretty solid and something I think we're pretty proud of. We've done a lot of work in that regard over the last 2 or 3 contract cycles. But I think what we're seeing, and I think you see it in society, you see it with the police department, you see it in other areas, we're being asked to accommodate problems that we didn't even think about 10 years ago and don't have the resources to address it. And so we're seeing more kind of catastrophic failure than do you have to buy a few pens. And trying to do our best to marshal the resources we do have to best address those problems. And that's, as the superintendent pointed out at the beginning, a very challenging circumstance to put a teacher in. So, so we have to provide support to our staff who are in a fight that they really aren't prepared to fight, and continue to promote development of our students without the support necessary, both kind of emotionally and socially, to give the students what they need.
Okay, and then the last portion is financially. Are we, because we're operating in this gap for such an extended period of time, are there gaps?
Sure.
I know we walk around and do the sort of capital improvements projects and see all the issues every year.
So, but you heard tonight, again, that we plan on replacing our switches and our Wi-Fi systems that we put in place right prior to the pandemic. So, you know, these are a decade in now, and, you know, these should have been addressed a little earlier, for sure. And we had to wait for our funding to accumulate in E-rate in order to get this done, because we didn't have the resources to just do it as it should have been done. You know, none of the buildings blew up. We have Wi-Fi capability throughout. We're doing work every day, but it should have been done earlier. It hasn't been done earlier. And we have a lot of systems. You know, you also heard about the phone systems in the middle and elementary schools. You know, when I got here, those were reclaimed corporate phone systems from our vendor, who was trying to help. He's a local fellow who was trying to make sure his school system operated properly and was doing everything he could to support the school district. Again, that should have been addressed a long time ago. Fortunately, we created this, which gave us a little more leverage in terms of having a backbone to plug into, and therefore reducing the impact of trying to change out the phone systems in the other schools that should have been done, you know, prior to this. So,
okay.
Yeah, we have, you know, difficult decisions to make every single day, based on the priority, which is at its core has always been for us, the students.
But with that gap increasing year after year,
the challenge increases year after year.
right?
Yeah, and so it's not a path you want to be on.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Scores?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Furtado, one of the statistics that I think is always important every year is to talk about fixed costs compared to where we have leeway to do more. When we're talking about net school spending, we're talking about being able to continue doing what we're doing now, not expanding, not new programs, exactly what we're doing right now. Can you speak to that? What is the percentage of what are fixed costs, which would be facilities and staff and everything else, and looking at the health care, the health and the retirement and the increase, is that number going to get tighter?
Yeah, so that's a very good point. You know, for those who didn't get an accounting degree, when you spend dollars, your home budget or the budget here at the schools, there is a piece of the budget that's required by contract. You don't have an option. You couldn't say, nah, not going to pay this time. We're going to move this money over here. You have to do it, and that's a fixed cost. You can't You don't have any choice, no discretion. In our budget, it has historically been something modestly north of 97% of every dollar we have. So while you see a large number, an extraordinarily large number of $109 million, we have about, I think in the 26 budget, about 2.4% of that is something we have decision-making ability with. Everything else is contractually obligated or legally obligated.
And what is, with the health care and with the retirement, how is that going to impact that 2.4%?
Yeah, as Ms. Perella pointed out, you know, our insurance budget's around $15 million. So when about, I think it's about $2 million in the retirement contribution annually now, is going up 8%, 18%. You can do the math, and that's a impressive number. But then again, the other $13 million is going up 10%. So that's almost $1.5 million. And say, nah, we have to absorb that.
President Delicia?
So thank you all for this. This is always educational. So question I have is we talk about the housing issues that we have here in the city, and we're looking, because we know there are several projects coming with multi-units. Are we concerned about a capacity issue in terms of the amount of students? If, you know, I mean, I think that's something that we should probably be keeping in the forefront of our minds.
Yes, absolutely. I think that you've seen sort of a shot across the bow with this water crisis where, you know, there are infrastructure issues throughout the city. It's not just the schools, where if you are going to sit 500 people in the middle of the city, there are requirements, sewer, water, public safety, and you know, desks in a classroom that you have to make sure you can accommodate that development with. And we from a just a basic physical space perspective, we're sort of up against it. This building has been a godsend in kind of having our enrollment bounce back. As you may recall, during the pandemic, our enrollment dipped quite significantly. We're well above that now, and to the point where, you know, we're starting to face the other side of that coin.
And it's not something we can just turn students away because there's no.
And we can't turn them away, and can't just build a building in a couple of weeks. So,
Thank you.
And hopefully that that assessment that we're currently undergoing will identify what limited spaces we have and how we need to realign schools, and that might give us a little bit of flexibility. But to Mr. Furtado's point, who knows what might come after that. Councilor LaFoy?
Just to follow up on that, it's absolutely true that you know, we do not, space is limited in the district. We don't have capacity to take on a significant number more students. That said, as superintendent, I want to go on record as saying the school department is pro-growth because the condition that most other communities in the Commonwealth are facing of declining enrollment is because, on the whole, the number of students in the state is going down. It's why you'll see school choice programs in almost every surrounding community. They are fighting over students because their numbers are going down, and the way funding is set up by the state, your dollars are attached to the number of students you have. So if you can't maintain a basic number of students, the buildings you have start to empty, and then you can't make the costs work. And so they're, you know, trying to attract students in. Attleboro, for the entire time I've worked here, has been pretty steady at 6,000 students. Where everyone else is declining, we've stayed there, and that's only because of growth that our number has stayed at that level. There is a number at which too much growth would absolutely cause a problem that is imagined and been discussed. But the only reason why we don't have the other problem of a financial crisis caused by not having enough students is because of growth in the city. So I think the challenge as a city is trying to maintain that. And again, for about 20 years, it's been magically right down the middle. If we can keep that going, that really works well for us. I guess I'm not quite sure why we've been so lucky that it doesn't stray in one direction or the other. And I hope that we don't kill that golden goose, but it has been critical to us that we've had growth in the city, because without it, I think we would be facing the same situation of declining enrollments.
Yeah, if I may, I appreciate that, because really where I was coming from was that, going back to classroom size, when you talked about the staff to student ratio, and then when Assistant Superintendent Regan was talking about the missing 200 personnel. I mean, it seems like if we're not aware of what could happen with, and I think it shows the symmetry between some of the votes that we take on the council, some of the impact that it could have here. So I think it's just worth having the conversation, so thank you.
No, absolutely, because again, we're right up against it, so there's not room for much more growth, but some growth helps to offset the overall trend of declining enrollment. I think that's the key point here. I also like to circle back to Councilman Kobus's question about the impact. As Mr. Furtado was just talking about, a significant portion of our budget, the majority of our budget is paying for our staff, right? And the majority of our staff are the teachers. And so, that's our greatest resource is our teachers. And the attention that they give students is a finite resource, right? There's one of them, there's, as Ms. Regan talked about, 20-something kids in the room, and in any one moment, they only have so much attention to give, right? And so, the amount of that resource that we're able to provide each student, right, is a key factor in our success. And so when we have high class sizes, and our class sizes are higher than averages both locally and across the state, that means that students have, to compete with their classmates for that time, and that teachers have less time to spread out among students. It also means that when we don't have the staff that would be providing the supports for students who have additional needs, right, those students are still in the room and are also requiring the attention of our teachers. So when you have needier students and you're addressing those needs as best you can as one of our educators, that means that that's time you're giving to them and not other students. And so, both the teachers feel the burden of the reduced staff because they don't have the supports and they have extra kids, but our students suffer from it because at the end of the day, they're getting less attention than they would get if they were in a district in which there were more people.
Thank you.
Councilor Lavoie?
Thank you. Thank you to the school committee for having us, and for the administrators for having us as well. I kind of wanted to dive more into, I guess, programs that we could provide but can't, or just maybe things that would be nice to have that we're not able to have as part of this gap. As a CTE grad, I think of some of the programs that maybe we can't roll out. So those are kind of things that I'd like to maybe dive into if we could. Just really things that maybe other communities around us are able to provide that would be nice to have here, but we're unable to do.
Well, I will say that when it comes to career and technical education, that's the one place where we have all of our neighbors beat. Attleboro High School and what we're doing at Attleboro High School is really singular in the state. That now 85% of our students at Attleboro High School are enrolled in one of our CTE programs, is unlike what anybody else is doing. We're not the only comprehensive high school in the state. There are plenty, but none that are offering 19 certified programs. Not that provide, we have an available seat for every one of our students. Now, they can't all necessarily take the program of their first choice, but we're able to provide seats for all of them. And so we've really transformed what it means to get a high school diploma by virtue of what we're able to offer through this building. And by the way, it was the building that made all that possible, and we planned for that opportunity in the design phase of this project. So, we really have the capacity and are offering more programming than any of our surrounding communities can. That's the good news. In terms of, what are the programs? I mean, that's a moving target all the time. Right now, I think the programs that we are offering reflect where the interests of our students lie. I'm not aware of any particular program that other communities have that we should bring. I mean, we sort of just completed that process where we brought things like robotics, into our school, cosmetology, another good example, HVAC. So we've brought those programs in that we're missing and we were losing students to as a result of that. And we're trying to keep up. We just added environmental science, so we're trying to stay at the cutting edge of what's out there. That's a process that we'll continue to go through, where we evaluate our programs. We'll reduce where we don't see the interest from our students, and we'll try to keep ahead of what we need to offer so that we're always offering the best possible choices for Attleboro students. And the fact that they get those educational experiences here with us, we think is a tremendous benefit to our students and to the community. That said, we do it here, I don't want to say on the cheap, but we're spending less than, other communities are. So, I don't think we're losing much in terms of what we're offering, but, could we be, would two-person programs allow us to offer more hours in our programs? Absolutely. So, where we have one teacher rather than two teachers, that affects our ability to offer more hours. I think there's where there's a little bit of give. The good news is that because it's a new building, these are state-of-the-art shops, and so we really are the envy of many, many schools in terms of what kinds of things are in the rooms. So that's something that we enjoy. But back to what's the long-term implications of this funding gap? Our ability to maintain that quality and to stay ahead and to buy new machinery and to be cutting edge. When we were in the old building, as you would know, there were a lot of machines that were, older than anyone in the building. So to not get ourselves back into a situation in which our stuff is old and outdated and a bit of an embarrassment, we have to stay on top of that. And luckily, our CTE director, Jeremy Gay, he's on top of that, and through grants, really working to come up with a plan so that we don't fall far behind. But back to the challenges we face, where money is so tight, this nice machine that's state of the art and will help a little bit with this program. Can we afford that $300,000 machine, or should we add a couple teachers? These are the kinds of difficult decisions we face as a result of the budgetary strain that we deal with every year.
Thank you. Just Superintendent Sawyer, before you walk away, outside of the high school, I know for a long time we wanted to increase music and performing arts in the middle schools, and we've made a lot of growth in those programs. Anything at the lower levels that you'd like to see that's missing because of the funding gaps?
I'll turn this over to Ms. Regan to speak specifically about the specific programs, but generally speaking, I think that as a district, what we're doing at our elementary level and what we're doing at the high school are where we're our strongest. I think we have a clear vision of what that looks like and what we need to be offering. Where we really need to give some attention to is the middle level. And what we did with our music department and our music program in the middle is, I think, has been a boon and a clear indication that there is much more work that we need to do to deepen and enrich the experiences that our middle-aged students are receiving. So I think that's the level that it's the most bare bones, because I think there's less clear and obvious answer to, what does good look like, right? There are good models of what elementary schools and high schools look like. It's harder to find a clear idea of what a middle school looks like, which is why in many communities what you see is the move to go away from middle schools, right? There are several communities that are either going to K-6 and then 7, 12 high schools and getting rid of middle altogether, or they're going K-8 schools and keeping elementary all the way through 8th grade and then going to high school. There are a lot of districts that are especially in cities, that are playing with some of these ideas because of some of the struggles with, what does a good middle school experience look like? So I think to answer the question more directly, I think middle school is where it needs the most attention. But I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Regan if she has some more to add to that.
Thank you, Superintendent Sawyer. As you mentioned earlier, middle school is the area that we really need to continue to focus on. And I think one of the things that we need to broaden our perspective on is we offer guidance services at the high school right now. And so really thinking about bringing that down to the middle school level so that students there can start to think about their long-term career pathways and what they're thinking moving forward on a personal level. We have our work with Portrait of a Graduate that we've been working on for years, and I think really having students think about ways in which those pillars of our Portrait of a Graduate will help them to be able to effectively communicate, collaborate, innovate, and be healthy and well-balanced. We need to be able to think more broadly about that with some of the career pathways and durable skills that our students will have through the Portrait of a Graduate and with the help of someone who's guiding them with those decisions. So middle school definitely, but in terms of specific programming, as Superintendent Sawyer said, we have to really think about what the model is that will be best for our students.
Thank you. Councilor Waterman?
Yes, thank you. Probably because I'm a social worker by trade. Could you comment, please, on the help that the children and the teenagers get in their issues at home, or the issues in life outside the school that affects their education, and how we're able to give them that help?
Right. So when they're in school with us during the day, we do everything that we can to provide them with strategies so that they're able to hold on to that information, hold on to that emotion, hold on to that so that they can learn, right? But we also know that they need to receive those services outside of the school day. We don't have those resources to provide that type of social work during the school day. They're here to learn. Our main priority is to teach them and to support them with their learning. Ms. DePalma and her team have done a phenomenal job with providing resources outside of the school day, connecting them with community resources, including William James Interface, so that students can get the counseling support that they need, if that's something that it is, or any other support in terms of maybe it's food related, it could be emotionally related, it could be housing related, it could be health related. Many, many things go into Ms. DePalma and her department and supporting all of our students, because there's a lot more that goes into supporting students than just teaching them. That's just one thing that we do.
Thank you.
Councilor Tavares?
So I had a question about, excuse me, McKinney-Vento, but Superintendent Sawyer's comments a minute ago triggered another question about the CTE programs. I was just wondering, in terms of interest among the students, is there or are there particular CTE programs that perennially show a certain interest among students?
I mean, yeah, sure. There are some programs that have a wait list, year in and year out. I know that criminal justice is an example of one. Culinary is, historically been a very successful program. Those are two that come off the top of my head. We have a new marketing program, which has been very successful. In fact, we just had to increase that one to 2 teachers because of the demand for it. So there are some that are generating wait lists, but there's pretty decent interest across all 19 programs, and that is something that they track and that Director Gay reports to the committee with some regularity.
So, Mike, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I wanted to make sure you had
the next question. So I appreciate that. That's helpful to know. So in terms of McKinney-Vento, so that was mentioned obviously as FY26 challenge, and I do recall being at this meeting last year, that was mentioned, and I presume that in prior years that has been an issue as well as a challenge. So I'm curious, just for my own edification, about whether you can speak to how this works logistically in terms of fulfilling on those transportation needs, and then also whether there are ways to make that more efficient. So in my mind, I'm thinking, are there, and I don't know, maybe these things are going on, are there opportunities to collaborate with school districts regionally that are potentially going to sort of the same, parts of the state to transport students back to, the Attleboro or surrounding communities, things of that nature?
I'm going to call in the big guns on this one.
So, yeah, the state, about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, tried to take a look at managing transportation needs for homeless and special needs students at a macro level, and to manage route efficiencies was the goal. And it was just too complex for them to wrap it up. We do work with other districts all the time. The problem is, specific to McKinney-Vento, the shelters are everywhere. They're just everywhere. So as a family, as a student, you don't have any control over where you go to get shelter. So they, and I think rightfully, try to offer you the opportunity to, as a minimum, given the circumstance, stay in the school that you're in. So quite literally, we could have students who are attending our schools get put into a homeless situation and go to a shelter in Boston. And the obligation is to bring them to the Attleboro schools. There are oftentimes conditions where there are multiple moves and there are multiple districts involved in taking care of that student, that family, where we share costs. So it's not necessarily entirely our burden. Again, on the other side of that coin, we had a condition 2 years ago where we had a Boston family get placed in the Attleboro shelter and an Attleboro family get placed in a Boston shelter. And we were involved in paying for transportation for both daily, which I forget what that number was, but it was something like $70,000 for the year, $80,000 for the year. So, and there's nothing you can do with that. We appealed to the state to, have them just switch shelters. That's something that didn't fly, and we lived with that for a year. So it's a highly complex, very volatile condition overall, and the state works very hard at trying to make sense out of what happened to the families and assigning, the proper municipalities with the responsibility of taking care of those families. But it can get pretty complex, and we don't have a lot of opportunity to consolidate and think of the transportation holistically and make it more efficient.
You have a follow-up, Council?
Thank you.
Mr. Bennett?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Wow, that's close. People like me with loud voices don't necessarily need the microphone right on top of them. Mr. Furtado, I have a question. I have a couple of dumb questions. This is something that I didn't know when I first got on the school committee. Of the $104 million municipally appropriated for FY25, some percentage of that comes from the state and some percent comes from the city, right? How does that break down?
It's very close to half to half.
It's about 50%.
Yeah,
So the $104 million cost the city $52 million or something along those lines. Okay.
Yes.
I wanted to make sure that everyone, not just here, but people like the tens of people who are glued to this meeting will also know that. Another thing I think is interesting about that, particularly about that graph, right, is it would be instructive to see what a similar graph looks like for other communities. Both communities that are close by, like North Attleboro, they're demographically and size-wise are radically different from Attleboro. and also communities that are more alike Attleboro, like Taunton. I'd be curious to see a graph or some more information about what those discrepancies look like, not just against the state average, because it's hard for people to think about the state average as a whole, what includes places like Belmont or whatever that have unlimited amount of money to spend on anything, right? But how do we compare against towns, both that the state has identified as part of our cohort and as towns that are local that people from Attleboro would know? I would love to, either in the future or now, hear more information about how that works.
So I don't have figures in front of me, so,
Understood.
this is my memory, which as I get older, becomes more suspect. And
Oh, you too?
these are rough, but we have looked at this exactly. And as Mr. Larson talked about earlier, right, there's two ways to think about funding. One is through just straight per pupil expenditure, right? And then the other is to look at it through, net school spending, which is an attempt to say that, educating different students costs a different amount, and so net school spending reflects the real cost of educating the kids that are actually here, right? And Attleboro, North Attleboro, when we compare ourselves to North Attleboro, they're with us in that list of the bottom districts on a per pupil expenditure basis, right? The per pupil expenditure in North Attleboro is low. I believe they're in the bottom decile, right there with Attleboro. So we're in good company. The problem is that they spend significantly above net school spending because we educate different kids, right? And Attleboro kids, on the whole, have greater needs than North Attleboro kids. And so if we were funded the way North Attleboro is, even though we're both at the bottom in terms of just straight per pupil, if we were funded at their level, we would actually have somewhere between $8 and $10 million more. So that's the straight comparison on a place like North.
So
and then
North spends more percentage of dollars over the minimum defined by the state, right? This was all new to me when I
Yes.
started here about a year ago, right?
Correct.
I didn't know what any of these things meant, so that's why I'm asking again to make sure I've retained the information correctly. 'Cause
That is correct.
I don't always do that.
That is correct.
But so the state says this is how much money it's going to cost Attleboro must spend in order to educate their students, and that's net school spending, right? So
Correct.
North Attleboro probably costs a lot less money to educate their students.
It does.
But they spend a greater percentage over net school spending.
Correct.
Okay.
That's exactly right.
Thank you.
And then Taunton, their net school spending, their above net school spending is real low like ours, right? So as another community without great means, they can't spend a lot of extra money either. But because they have greater needs than we do, they actually spend significantly more per pupil than we do.
Because they get more state.
Because they get more from the state. And so this is the way that Attleboro's in this weird place. We're not wealthy enough to just handle our problems ourselves, but we're not poor enough to get the lavish extra support that other communities do. And so if I forget exactly, but like if we were funded the way Taunton is, I think we'd have closer to $20 million more. So both Taunton and North Attleboro are good examples of how, in very, very different ways, it's better to be either of them than it is to be Attleboro. From a funding perspective.
If that's fighting words.
Yeah, yes.
The other question was, a few people have asked me over the years, why don't we have middle school Spanish or middle school foreign languages? And my answer has consistently been because we can't afford it, right?
That's
so I'm assuming that
exactly
that would be
right.
one of the things you could line up if magically we got more money, right?
Yep.
And so those are things that are out there.
It's a good
right?
example of what we're talking about.
Right. Thank you.
Councilor Fola?
Thank you. I heard you say we were making a mistake if we look at the micro level, but what's happening to the school district is catastrophes, and those create macro level expenses. But catastrophes, do they happen yearly?
Well, I mean, I guess it depends on how we define a catastrophe. But yeah, I mean, the school district is a pretty large organization, right? I mean, we have about 1,000 employees, and there's 6,000 students who come here every day. As I like to joke, there's only 4 people at my house, and I can't get them to all get along and do what they're supposed to do. It goes without saying that, I mean, we're managing pretty significant problems day in and day out, and the resources that are available do affect our ability to stay ahead of that and to address that. You know, one of the things that we've spent money on in my time as your superintendent is we've increased the size of the administration. Now, there are some people who would say, oh, there you go, you know, more administrators, what you needed is more teachers. You just said we need more teachers, and we do need more teachers. But the fact of the matter is that when we looked at the calculus of if we hired a couple more teachers, you know, that goes to, you know, 1 per building or whatever. So that means that in 1 grade level in that particular school, there's a reduce in the number of kids per class, and that's a benefit to that grade level, but the rest of the teachers don't get any benefit from that. Whereas if you add another assistant principal like we did at our middle schools, that's a person who's there to serve all the students, all of the teachers. That's another person who's there to help when we have all the various things that are being thrown at us in a given day. That's another body that's there to help solve those problems and to address them. And so, you know, trying to be smart about how we use these resources so that we can manage the problems that we see every day. You know, in a lot of ways, the district, you know, 180 days, we're sitting on a boiling pot. You know, we're trying to build an organization that understands what its responsibilities are and understands the right way to handle these problems and is successful in getting through the day, addressing these things in a way that really mitigates, you know, the damage that's done by whatever it is that we're talking about.
Mr. Domenici?
Thank you. Dave, my numbers could be off, but, you know, of the percentage of teachers that we have across the district, what percentage would you consider to be in the, I don't know, like top step to later stages of the career? And the reason I bring that up, obviously, is our teachers are what are keeping us afloat, and we have a lot of tenured teachers that are getting towards the retirement age. And so while on the one hand, when you bring in new teachers, you bring them in at a lower salary, there's also a significant education gap potentially. You know, I have high hopes in that, but we had a gap where kind of like that middle tranche, so that they become the more tenured as our newer become the middle tranche, and then we get newer. We're missing kind of a gap of that. So like what percentage would you say, to your best guess, you know, our teachers fall within this
well,
category?
certainly Ms. Singer can come and bail me out if I'm way off, but the last time we looked at this carefully that I remember, we were top heavy. So that's to say that we had about 2/3 veteran and, you know, 1/3 in the scale. I mean, as I get older and we keep hiring younger people, it feels like we're getting younger. But whether or not that's really changed the balance, I'll let Ms. Singer address that more specifically.
I think, as Superintendent Sawyer said, we are trending towards a newer staff on the lower end of the wage scale, but we're still a good 60% top heavy. But again, as you know, increasing numbers of teachers decide to retire, you're right, replacing them with less experienced, newer colleagues will start to shift that trend. I think 5 to 10 years, that should shift significantly.
Thank you. And I mean, on top of that, post-COVID, we're not seeing as many young educators coming through the ranks. My daughter wants to be a kindergarten teacher, and I ask her every day, are you sure? And she's very sure. But we're not seeing as many coming in and becoming available, as well as not just, you know, your traditional teachers, but also your specialists, which is also a challenge.
It's a
because there are
challenge,
fewer
but-
resources to try and
There
bring
are,
in.
to address a question that was asked earlier about our ability to attract and retain staff, we really don't struggle with attracting staff, except in those high areas of special ed, certain sciences, physics, chemistry. Those are still a challenge, world language. But the majority of our positions, we really don't struggle with applicants. We usually have a good pool of individuals. So we have seen that continue. We have seen a little less in terms of, we've seen more retention of staff post-COVID years, immediate post-COVID. There was quite an exodus of staff. That was not unique to Attleboro. That was nationwide.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not saying it's an
yeah.
Attleboro problem per se.
Yeah.
That's more of a nationwide issue. I wasn't challenging our ability to attract. There's just been less available
Correct.
people to attract
Yes.
because less people are going into the profession. So when we talk
correct.
about
Yes.
catastrophic events, like I think of those things and how that'll impact us as much as anything when we have an obligation to provide these services. And when we don't have them, we have to spend money on consultants to come in and provide them. And that takes up a portion of our budget that we have very little wiggle room to play with. So that's another part of the challenge that we've had. We couldn't get enough paraprofessionals. We had to contract them. Contractors make more money.
And Ms. Singer, before you walk away, you mentioned the significant departure of educators during COVID and that not being unique to Attleboro. Similarly, the struggles to fill positions in special education and specialized sciences and programs, that's not unique to Attleboro either, correct?
Correct. No, that is not.
Thank you. Councilor Holmes?
Thank you. Has there been significant growth to the virtual academy and night school?
The answer is no. It's been pretty steady the last few years.
Any other questions? Mr. Bennett?
Thank you. One of the things that I heard the most when I was knocking doors last summer and last fall and just talking to people at football games or whatever is a large concern about preventative maintenance, particularly on this particular beautiful facility, right? And a lot of people have said, they better be taking care of that high school because we're never building another one, or whatever it is. It's always right on the money. And the fact is that it's hard to say we're doing every single possible thing that needs to be done on these facilities when it's nickel to nickel to nickel. So I wanted just to touch on that and see if you have any remarks, Mr. Furtado particularly or whatever, about what happens, like that TV, when you buy a brand new TV, it's beautiful, right? And 10 years later, it's a 10-year-old TV and no one wants to look at it anymore. So is there the ability to provide rolling replacements of equipment, and as computers are bought, can they be funded to be replaced, 5, 10 years down the road, et cetera? And how does that work in a level spending, in a level service budget world?
Yes, so again, what we've done is, a few things. We've changed the heating cooling infrastructure in the district, which has yielded savings in terms of our operating needs for the district, which avails itself to, we had in this building, the equipment requires additional air filter changes. It costs $70,000 per change for this building. So when we kind of collect efficiency money, the way we do things, utility contracts, there's a lot of ways to do that. It gets to offset the additional cost of maintaining this building. We had a recent retirement of 3 people in our maintenance department who have been here for 30 years each. We took the savings in those salaries to bring on another HVAC person who's dedicated to this building. So we are taking steps to make sure we stay on top of things. We are certainly aware of the slippery slope that deferred maintenance causes. We're not interested in getting involved with that here. We've been very, very fortunate to have had worked with a great team who continues to support us in questions and, operating burps we run into in the building and help us address problems. So we're very, very sensitive to that. We are developing additional resources to address that and kind of dedicating our savings from efficiencies to fund that.
Thank you. That's keeping the ship afloat.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, absolutely.
And Mr. Furtado, in the past, we've also heard that the savings on maintenance in this building, since it has opened, has allowed us to do more of that preventative maintenance in other buildings that we have not been able to keep up with
Yeah,
historically.
as we said tonight, the phone system is a result of that. We're working on access control in the other buildings as a result of that. We have some other plans that we haven't kind of finalized yet that has allowed us. We're bringing Brennan down this summer to do a complete renovation inside. That building hasn't been addressed in 15 years. So yeah, the fact that this building is new and we're not replacing windows and boilers and heating pipes every week has allowed us to look at the other facilities and start addressing things there too.
Thank you. Mr. Larson?
I just want to jump in and add that I think there's a little bit of a misunderstanding of exactly how we got ourselves in the situation with the old high school that we did. And, it predates me. So honestly, my sense of these things is based on folklore, to be honest with you. But, Proposition 2.5 in the early 80s was devastating to the Attleboro public schools, right? In the 70s, Attleboro was held up as an example of progressive education. People came here to see the schools and to learn from what Attleboro was doing because it was held up as a shining example of what education could be. Proposition 2.5 ended that. In one particular year, a third of the teachers in the district were fired, right? And my perception is that the 80s were tumultuous for the city and the schools as a result of not being able to really recover from that, which led to the strike by the teachers in the late 80s, which was acrimonious. And I'm here to tell you that it still reverberates in the culture of the district. So in that context, Attleboro High School was neglected for a long number of years. And then when the city got back to a different place and started to invest in schools and built Wamsutta and built Brennan and redid Willett and all the school projects that went on in the 90s, I think there was a very intentional decision to neglect taking care of the high school, thinking that we'd let that one go and then handle that one last. And why invest money into a building that we're going to redo at the end of that process? For reasons that don't really matter. We never really got to that moment in the early aughts. Although I'm here to tell you, I remember distinctly in the late 90s being in the principal's office and the principal telling me, "Oh, you should have a new building by 2003." That was the thinking at that time, is that the high school was going to be handled as the last building in that cycle of addressing all the other buildings. And all the other buildings were addressed. But that didn't happen, and that got punted for another decade. So when it came time to do something about, when it became, talk about catastrophes, well, when the situation at the high school was, on the near precipice of a disaster, we had to make the case to the community that the building had been so neglected and it was in such terrible disrepair that it literally was cheaper to knock it down and build a new one than it was to fix it. And that was the difficult message that was true, right? I'm not a contractor, so I don't know, but we have good reason to believe that message was accurate. And I think that was a bitter pill for a lot of people to swallow, that why didn't we take better care of the high school, right? That was a question I got asked as the person who went around and tried to sell this to the community. It was a fair question. Why didn't we? And I wasn't there, so I couldn't really answer it. But I do think that sort of narrative of, are you guys going to take care of this high school, or are you going to do what you did like the last one? I think the conditions that led to the way things played out for that whole building, are not the same. And we do understand our responsibilities as stewards of this, this amazing building to not not to neglect it and not to let it to slip into a set of conditions that we faced in that old building.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Did you want to conclude the, I know we've got another slide.
Yes, yeah. Well, let's finish this thing up.
Ooh, another slide.
So, conclusion, right on cue. So, as I talked about, we're expecting the governor's budget at the end of the month. In April is usually when we get the House proposal, and then by June, the whole thing's reconciled. So, that's the normal timeline that I know you're familiar with. We will go through this process like we do every year, and work very closely with the mayor to make sure that we have a plan for how to make FY26 a successful year like the last few. So from a budget perspective, we're pretty satisfied with the fact that we've worked hard on structuring our liabilities so that our main cost, as we've talked about, is staff, and we're able to limit the cost of staff enough so that when we have these other aspects of the operation, like insurance costs or special ed costs or transportation costs, right? When those things are runaway expenses that we have no control over, we still are able to come in and say level services are 4.9%, and that's only possible because we've worked so hard to make sure that the costs we do have some control over are manageable and structured so that they no longer are the reason why we're facing a budget crisis from year to year. That's no longer the condition in the city. We work hard to understand the city's position and what we need to do and work together so that in any given year, we're going to be able to get the job done. And we are. And that's why I say there's no reason for concern or to cause panic when I talk about that there is a sort of cloud that hangs over all of this, that we're operating at a deficit that does come at a cost year in and year out. And I think as a community, we need to engage in a conversation about what, if anything, can we do to change that. And certainly the idea that we need to work on the formula, and if the state gives us the opportunity to do that, because there is some recognition that there are problems with it, we need to capitalize on that. But the bottom line is that the community has modest means, and as the largest department, that significantly affects us. But I'm here to say, it's I'm not telling you as the council anything you don't know. It affects all the departments, right? As a community, the resources we need to deliver the services the people of the city want is really strained by what we have available to us, and the schools are no different in that regard. So I conclude with that.
Thank you, Superintendent Sawyer. Any final questions? Excellent. Well, thank you again, Municipal Council, for joining us and hearing this information and asking some incredible questions that I think the community also has and needs to hear. And thank you to the committee for also asking some clarifying questions to help further the message and clarification of what the administration has provided. So I'll turn it over to President Delisio to adjourn the Municipal Council.
Thank you. Thank you again, Chair Gaddis, for the opportunity here. I think these are very valuable meetings. Appreciate everyone coming out tonight. That being said, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you. Motion's in order. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you and have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you. While the council departs, we'll briefly recess to give them a couple minutes to depart. I will call the school committee back to order. We do have some remaining items on our agenda. Next item is our consent agenda. There are 8 items. Would anyone like me to take any separately? Seeing none. First is a motion to accept a donation in the amount of $356 from Gifts and Things Incorporated for Skills USA at the high school. Motion to accept a donation in the amount of $86.06 to the marketing class of 2026 from Attleboro Bliss Dairy Restaurant. Motion to accept a contractual obligation from Shutterfly LLC in the amount of $8,886.61 as broken down in my memo from January 6th. Motion to accept a donation in the amount of $24,000 from the Feinstein Foundation as broken down in my memo from January 6th. Motion to accept a donation in the amount of $1,000 from Bay Path University to the Thatcher Gifts donation line. Motion to accept a contractual obligation in the amount of $20.40 from Bay State Textiles to Hill Roberts Elementary School. Motion to accept a donation of a Conveyed stroller with an estimated value of $1,500 from Shane Burkalt, Attleboro Public Schools staff member, as detailed in the December 30th, 2024 memo from the Special Education Director. And a motion to approve a day field trip proposal for 52 grade 11 and 12 Attleboro High School students to visit the Museum of Contemporary African Diasporan Arts in Brooklyn, New York on May 9th, 2025.
So moved.
Second.
All right. Motion made and seconded. Does any discussion, questions, concerns? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Next is a subcommittee meeting update from our Finance and Budget Subcommittee. And for that, I will turn it over to Subcommittee Chair Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Budget and Finance Subcommittee met last Thursday, January 2nd. We do have one motion coming forward from that meeting. Mr. Furtado and Ms. Barola took us through the monthly budget reports, and things currently are on track. We're estimating to have between 0.5 and 1% of a surplus. At this point, we're about halfway through the year. We had a FY26 budget presentation that I'll get to in a second. And then we also had an update on the redistricting that's currently underway. We continue to be in the data collection phase, and that we will, the contractor that we're using will be doing more data analysis over the next few months. And then in the next few months, they will be back in the district to do more building evaluations and reviews as they start to put proposals together to let us know what their recommendations are for how many students we should have in each one of the buildings, and then from there, deciding what students should be in each building based on their residence, and have something to roll out to us towards the end of April so that we can roll it out to the community in May. Unless anyone has any questions on any of that, I'll get to the motion. All right, seeing no questions. The one motion that did come out of the meeting is it was recommended for approval by the full committee that the school committee submit to City Hall for the FY26 school budget year of $117,356.76 for their budget.
So moved.
Second.
Are any questions or concerns? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Mr. Chairman, that's the extent of our report.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. Next on the agenda is open forum. Is there anyone here that would like to address the committee as part of open forum? Seeing none, I will close open forum. Some upcoming reminders. Our Policy and Personnel Subcommittee will be meeting next Monday, January 13th at 6:30 p.m. in the Zito Conference Room. The Teaching and Learning Subcommittee will meet next Tuesday, January 14th at 6:30 p.m. in the Zito Conference Room. A reminder to the community that on Monday, November 17th, we will not have school in celebration of the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. And the next full school committee meeting will be held in the Zito Conference Room on Monday, January 26th at 6:30 p.m. 27th, sorry. Thank you. Any other updates or new business from the committee? All right, seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you.